Hello and welcome to the 315. My name is Ruth Woodsend. Thank you so much for stopping by. As always, I really hope that these videos help parenting secondary age children just that little bit easier and make things a bit clearer. Today I wanted to talk a little bit about picking and researching a post-16 centre for your young person. And I think the big thing that I talk about in the blog post, which accompanies this topic, is that although you can be really super supportive and go along to open evenings and open days if they have them during the day, the decision eventually about where they're going to study their A-levels or their BTECs, their post-16 choices, really needs to come down to the young person themselves to some degree. And I think through their primary schooling and their secondary schooling, lots of the decision making probably will be made by you as parents and carers because you have all the research in front of you. But the big headline, I guess, by post-16 is you want that year 11 going into year 12 student to have some ownership of the decision that's going to be made about the next couple of years for them. So you want them to be really involved and excited about what's coming next. So the first thing to talk about is the timeline of what's going to happen over the next few months. So in year 11, although you might be thinking about it in year 10, which would be brilliant, but certainly in year 11, in that autumn term, so October kind of time, most post-16 centres, and that would be colleges, so further education colleges, sixth form schools, they will be having open days and open evenings. So they might be open during the day so you can actually go and have a look around and see classes in action, which would be brilliant. And certainly open evenings where you and your child can go and meet some people and perhaps meet the students and get all the information. They will happen in the October kind of time. And schools between them should have a conversation about when their open days and their evenings are so that you can see as many as you can. So they shouldn't overlap. There should be a general consensus in the area that I'll take this date and you take this date so that they don't overlap. So students can actually apply to as many of those post-16 centres as they'd like to. And actually, I'd say the big piece of advice is if they like a handful of them, then make sure they put their applications into a selection of colleges and schools, because you can always say no to them later on down the line, but if you've missed the deadline, then that's going to make it very difficult then to get in after the deadline. But there'd be an expectation from most schools and colleges that there'd be an application made December or January of year 11. So even though they haven't even done their GCSEs yet, they will need to be putting in an application. It feels quite a long way in advance of them going, but kind of that Christmas time, so December, January, they need to be putting an application in. Students would find generally that if there's going to be an interview or some kind of conversation that's going to happen, or there's an expectation that they go into the college or school to do some form of interview process, then that would happen around Easter. So probably March, April, that kind of time. So around May time, schools and colleges will be sending out places to students to say, we really liked your application, and as long as you do manage to get these results, then yes, we'd love to see you in September to come along to our school or our college. The only other thing you need to be aware of in terms of a timeline is there should be some form of induction process, and that might be a day or maybe a week, or perhaps it will be something in the summer holidays where students have the opportunity to experience something to do with that college or sixth form. So they might do kind of a taster day where they experience some of the lessons themselves, just like they did in year 7. They might come in and experience the school canteen and the rhythm of the day and where you park your bike or your car, and just to get a general feel of what it's going to be like to be in the building. And that will vary a lot from college and school to college and school. So it might be a week, it might be a day, it might be that there'd be some form of summer school that would happen, but there should be some form of induction process so the student feels comfortable about starting in September and has a bit of an idea about what's going to happen next. It's also worth saying that at that summer school or that induction, students might be given some form of homework or research or summer project or reading that they should do to get themselves really ahead of the game for September. I know that as an English teacher, we normally hand out a reading list or maybe even just the book that we are going to be reading first in September so that students could either read it, or they could watch a play version of it, or they could just start to get some research and start to look into it. But there should really be something they're doing over the holiday. And if you're not given that, then I'd be saying to my son or daughter, listen, have a look on the website, or phone the school and say, look, what could I be doing over the summer to make sure I'm really ready to go in September? Because actually, of all the summer holidays, that's the summer holiday where there shouldn't really be that much on. They'll have finished their GCSEs, June. So they've got all of June, July and August then, and that's a big block of time to perhaps just be doing a bit of gentle getting ready for their A-levels and for their post-16 options. As a parent, I think it's really important and empowering for you to know that just in the same way that you compared and you researched secondary and primary schools when they were little and when they were going off to secondary school, you can do exactly the same thing for post-16. And I will put the link below in the comments below so that you can literally look at the data and all the progress results for the post-16 options and the schools and colleges that you're interested in or your young person is interested in. And it's exactly the same process, and it's really, really clear the way the government lays it out. I've talked about this in the blog, but it's also for parents worth noting that if you live in England specifically, the law is that you have to stay at school in education or training until you're 18 years old. And that isn't the case in Wales and Scotland and Northern Ireland. But in England, you have to make sure you stay until you're 18 years old. It might be a case that your son or daughter would be far better suited to an apprenticeship. And there's a brilliant advertising campaign that's happening at the moment to get students and presumably parents interested and excited in that as an option instead. So again, I will link it below, but an apprenticeship might be a better fit for your son or daughter. So it means that they do training on the job and they come out of that with a qualification, they are paid, and they are skilled in a real workplace environment. So hopefully they could go straight into a job, a career or profession which they're really interested in. This won't be relevant for all students, but I would want to be really clear on what the situation is at that post-16 centre or the college about retakes. So you won't know at this point, right in October when you're doing the kind of looking around and the open evenings, whether your child is going to need to do a retake, I guess. But I would want to be clear, especially if my child was borderline in maths or in English, what's the situation with retakes? So the situation is that if a student doesn't achieve at least a level 4 at GCSE in English or maths, then they have to retake it, and they'll have to keep retaking it until they are 18 in England. They have to keep retaking it. So I kind of would want to know what the situation is with retakes. So do they do a November entry? So maths and English you can retake either a couple of months after they go into their post-16. So do they do the November entry, or are they open to that as an idea, or do they only do the next summer? What are the retake classes like? So would my child just go in to a year 11 class, or are there explicitly retake classes? So I would be asking about how much time is allocated on the timetable for retake classes. So I would be wanting at least 5 periods on the timetable for English and for maths if they were doing both of them, because I think if they haven't managed to achieve the level 4 in their GCSE period, then they're going to need really some support and tuition and teaching to help to make sure that they get through the next time taking it, whether that's November or in the summer. So I'd want to be really clear on what they're doing with that. So I've talked about comparing post-16 centres and options, and as a parent now, these are some of the things that I would be looking at both on the comparison site, but also when I go into those post-16 open evenings with my student, with my son or daughter. I would be asking, if it's not really clearly advertised, about these kinds of pieces of data, like what percentage of students at this school over the last couple of years, and it's worth thinking about the last few years, don't just focus on literally last year, because it could be a really good year, and I know this from working in schools, it could have been that last year was a very good year, or that last year was a really tricky year. So don't judge a school just on what happened within the last 12 months, really look back the last couple of years to give it a real indication of if there are massive peaks and troughs or if it's fairly kind of regular. And you can do that on the school comparison website. It does show you over the last few years how the school has done. what percentage of students in this centre over the last few years came out with an A star to C in their A-levels. And I'd also, again, depending on the student, be interested to know how many students were coming out with the very top grade, so an A star and an A. And the same thing is also true for BTECs. So I would be asking how many or what percentage of students came out with a distinction and a distinction star in BTECs, and also how many students came out with distinction star all the way through to pass. But incidentally, another figure which is really, really important, and probably to me the most interesting piece of data, is I would be asking about their progress figures. And I've written lots more about that in the blog post. But to give you a bit of an overview, all post-16 centres, just like secondary schools, should publish their progress figures. And that means the students where they started when they came in at the beginning of sixth form to when they finished, how much progress or how much distance or how much value did the school add to them over those couple of years. And what schools and the government do is they take that data, and it's a bit complicated, but they take the data and they compare it to other schools and say how well they are doing. So if a school comes out with a 0 score, that means that they are broadly in line with schools across the country. So they are moving children forwards and improving children at about the same speed and effectiveness as other provisions across the country. If it's a minus number, so like a -1 or a -2, then it means that they are not making as much progress as other schools around the country. And if it's perhaps a really effective school, and lots of schools are doing this, then you might see a plus figure like +1 or +2. Schools generally are between a -2 through to a 0 and then up to plus. You will also want to be clear on what the expectation is from that school about how many A-levels or BTECs that they would want them to be taking. Now, it's important to know that universities talk about actually having 3 and 3 being enough. So definitely the headline is that no student and parent should feel pushed into taking more. That being said, there are schools and colleges where students will end up taking 4, and that's fine, but don't feel pushed into taking lots and lots and lots of things and being overwhelmed by it. Something else I'd be interested in is what's their careers advice. So is there somebody that's specifically on site whose job it is to educate and train students? I'd also want to be asking about what their careers advice is. So is there actually a member of staff who is on site to have interviews with students, to talk to them about what's going to happen next? At any sixth form, whether that's a college or a school, they have a real responsibility to be preparing students from year 12 all the way through those next 2 years for what's going to happen next after that. And that might be university, that might be them going off into a job, that might be them doing some form of extra training. But it shouldn't be a case that students feel that they are just dropping off the end of a slope after they finish their A-levels or their BTECs. So what's the provision there for getting them ready for the next bit afterwards? A really easy one to talk about is destinations, and schools should be able to provide you with both kind of data and statistical data, but also just their experiences of what the destinations are for young people after they have finished at that centre and that post-16. So I would want to be talking about how many students went to university, how many students went to Russell Group universities, and there's more information on the blog, but there are 24 universities who are kind of famous for their research and for the quality of education. So they're universities like Cardiff and Bristol and Oxford and Cambridge. But how many students from here went to Russell Group universities? How many students went to Oxbridge, so Oxford and Cambridge specifically? And I'd want to know if they have links with any of these universities, especially the local universities. So I'm in Bristol, and I know the schools I've worked with have had relationships with the universities that are close to us, because there's lots of brilliant stuff that we have access to that both inspires students and gets them excited for further education, but also complements the A-levels that they are doing at the moment anyway. So there might be an opportunity to go to a poetry lecture, or there might be the opportunity to use facilities in a science laboratory at a university. So I think it's really important that schools and colleges are really open to relationships with the local universities near them. Also, as a parent and as the young person, I think there's some really practical stuff that I would want to be looking at while I was going around on those open evenings. So Transport is one off the top of my head. So perhaps you might be coming in the car and dropping them off every day. Then where exactly am I going to do that? Like, is it going to be easy? Where could I do that? If they're driving, or if they're going to be driving, in year 13, do they have specific places for students to park their cars? Or what's the local area like for me parking my car? Hopefully there might be some opportunity for them, or a place for them to park their bikes. Is there an opportunity or a space for that? Bus links. Have a think about how your student is going to get there, and especially if it's a split site. And I've worked in schools where their post-16 is over split sites. It is nightmarish if students are having to travel for a long way in between the day to get to their next subject. I think it's amazing if the student can do photography in one centre and politics in another centre and English in another centre, but really be aware that that is a lot of travelling for some students, and I think it's not a small thing, and don't underestimate to be able to be, for most of your subjects, in the same place with staff on tap to really help you out, rather than just communicating with staff by email or being late to lessons because the bus or the transport hasn't worked out for you. Again, in terms of the practical side, ideally you would see an actual classroom. And I think displays can be really amazing, and I love displays, like I think they're really important, but you'll get a sense by physically being in a classroom environment, ideally during the day, if you can get to go and see it during the day as an open day rather than an open evening and see classes in action. But you'll get a feeling for what those spaces are like. Like, are they a loved space? Are teachers and students able to kind of contribute to what the walls look like, and have they got displays up, and are there examples of work? Is this somewhere that students are really proud of and enjoy being? And there's other really practical stuff though as well, like what are the facilities like? So do they have lots and lots of computers and technology? And is there a quiet place for study? When is the school open in the morning? Is there the possibility of them staying after school? So, could they do their homework and their research and their study there? What's the library like? Do they have Wi-Fi? Are you allowed to use your phone there? There's some really practical stuff. Don't underestimate that you'll be seeing, open days and evenings are in October. So the autumn, when it's kind of a bit rainy or a bit cold perhaps. Make sure you clock or you ask questions about the green area. Is there somewhere to sit outside in the summer? What's the canteen like as well? Like, where do students actually eat and where do they socialise together? It's 2 years, and you really want your child, your son or daughter, to look back and think, this was just a really great time and I grew up loads in those 2 years. So I don't think it's just about the classrooms, it's about, as an entire centre, what are they doing to make it a great place to work and to be on a daily basis. I think then we get into the really fun stuff, the stuff that, I was definitely looking for, and I still get excited about when I go into schools and colleges now. So all the really fun stuff, so the extracurricular activities, what are they doing to make this just an incredible, exciting place? And I don't think that this needs to be about money, because there will be some colleges and schools where there will be loads of money thrown at some super exciting things like trips and clubs, but it doesn't have to be like that. I'd be really interested in, what do students themselves run? So do students themselves run a newspaper or a radio station? Or I'd be interested in how much students themselves take ownership of the extracurricular activities. So there might be a school council, for example, and if there is a school council, then try and ascertain from the students themselves, who will probably walk you around on open evening, like you probably talk about stuff at school council, but how much do you listen to? Like, do changes in the school happen because of things that you suggest? Do you feel like you're valued? Do you feel like you're part of the community? Can you give me an example of something that perhaps happened? And that's not to say don't be dismissive of all the other things that are there. So there might be a gym on site, there might be a pool on site perhaps, I don't know, or there might be access to a pool that's connected to it. There might be loads of really exciting stuff, but just look for those moments of wow, of things that the school are really proud of, the students are really proud of, that are going to make this more than just school, that are going to make this somewhere that they just love going. In reality, although I've said that it's their choice, I think the biggest thing that you can be doing as parents and carers is going along with them to these open evenings and open days wherever you can, and just be really, really excited for them and stressing, my goodness, the opportunities that you're going to have such an amazing couple of years here, and just making this really exciting. And that's for lots of reasons. There might be some students who are feeling a bit flat because they're not really enjoying their GCSEs, and there might be some students who are feeling a bit overwhelmed by GCSEs in terms of academically, like this is a bit too much. So for some students, this is just a really great fresh start. This is a start to say, for the first time, I know that they do options, but for the first time, I really, really consider exactly what courses I'm going to take. And these are the things that I love and I'm good at and I want to perhaps use in my career. So really emphasise to students and to your son or daughter, this is the start of a whole other chapter of your life, and be excited for them right from that October when you first start talking about it, all the way through to the summer holidays just before they start their new post-16 experience. I wanted to end by saying I think that every time I do a blog post, I think of a handful of other things that I would love to talk to you about. So I know in the future I'd really like to talk about post-16 parents' evenings, data on post-16 reports that I could talk through with you, the UCAS process, and generally things that you could do to support your child through post-16. But if there's anything that I've missed or anything really practical that I could help out with, then please do comment below, or through my blog you can find my email, so send me a message on there. If you found this video useful, then please do give me a like and make sure that you are subscribed so that you are aware of when the next video comes out. Thank you so much for stopping by. It's always really lovely to have you here.